We will give your thoughts and our reactions to the NYPD detectives dirty dancing slash acting as a video vixen and all the outrage associated with it. Of course, I'm Mike Scala, and this is Nuance. I'm an attorney joined by fellow hip hop artist Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the chair of BLM Tokyo. Yeah, I see a lot of talk over this situation with the cop. Jay, what are your thoughts on what's going on here?
Yeah, well, we did kind of get into it last week, but we now we got some results from the poll that we put out, and actually last time I had seen the video, you hadn't. So
Right.
let's start there. You've
Okay.
seen the video now.
Yes, I did see the video. I think maybe in my mind, I was expecting it to be more scandalous, right?
Hmm.
More salacious or whatever than it was because I watched it and my immediate reaction was, why would anyone care? You know what I mean? It seems so innocent to me. Not innocent, like innocent, like wholesome. No, I mean, obviously it's dirty dancing, right? It's the kind of dance you would see in a strip club, like we established last week, and you see in many hip hop videos. You know, not all hip hop, right? But there is an element that celebrates or showcases strip club culture or whatever, especially
Uh-huh.
in the South, right? It's a big thing. So it's not something that I hadn't seen before, and it wasn't done in a particularly uh, lewd or obscene kind of way. It actually seemed pretty tasteful for what it was. So I didn't see what the issue was.
Well, as far as like I said, I think even last week I mentioned I was like, it's not like she was dancing like overtly sexual or like simulating sex acts, you know? She was dancing sexily, but um it wasn't like she was, like I said, simulating a sex act. And she didn't really have a lot of, she wasn't like grinding on the dude or any, it was mostly
Yeah,
her dancing by herself.
right, right. And so, what is the actual controversy here? This is what I want to know because, like you said, she's not simulating sex on video. This is far from what you would consider pornographic, right? It's not that.
Right.
He
But
has
to be
all.
fair, this video would probably be classified as not safe for work, though.
Okay, maybe it depends on where you work. Fair, right?
Right.
Um, Let me modify what I just said. She doesn't have all of her clothes on, but she's not completely naked, is what I meant. She's covering up her private parts, right?
She's wearing like you might see a very brawn panties or a very skimpy bikini.
Okay, okay. And so again, what is the actual controversy here? It's not my cup of tea. It's not the kind of thing I like to watch. And yes, we touched on it last week. I do find strip club culture, I guess, to be a little bit inherently degrading towards women or sometimes towards the men, right? If they do it themselves, not just women. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't like it for those reasons. It kind of rubs me the wrong way, I guess. I guess on that level, I understand why some people don't like it, and I'm not one who likes it either. But there's a difference between liking it, enjoying it for yourself, and thinking it's appropriate or not, right? I think those are two different discussions. And if
Right.
someone else wants to do it, if someone else finds it empowering or it's just what they enjoy doing, it's their passion, it's consensual, right? No one's being forced to do it. No one's being forced to watch it. So do what you do. Some people like it, some people don't. Like we talked about at the halftime show discussion. I don't like most country music or a lot of genres, Kentucky bluegrass, whatever. It's just not my thing. But it doesn't mean that I find it offensive or inappropriate. It's just not my deal. You know what I mean? So why can't we leave it at that? It's just not what everyone enjoys to watch or listen to as music or whatever. But it doesn't interfere with their ability to do their job, and it's not unbecoming of a professional.
Well, I think that's the question there, right? If it's unbecoming of her position. She's a police detective, which is a position that requires public trust and a higher level of scrutiny and, a certain image that has to be projected so that people will, believe in you taking that responsibility and you, protecting them and whatnot. So I don't think it's necessarily at the dance itself. It's because of who she is, I think.
Ooh, okay, I agree that they're subject to a higher level of scrutiny, and I don't see how that connects to someone dancing.
You know, I can see a way, like, listen, how serious it's like how serious do you take someone if you've seen them naked? It's kind of that type of thing.
But why
Yeah.
would you take someone less? You're talking about someone that you've been intimate with. Why would you take them less?
No, not someone you've been intimate with.
What
Just
do you mean by that? If you see them
like
naked, why should that matter?
the cop, she shows up on the scene, and you've seen her, you've seen her naked all over the internet. People might take her less seriously.
First of all, she's not naked. Like we said, she has clothes on. She's
Okay,
covering up
okay.
her
You've
butt.
seen the booty meat. You've seen it out there. So people
You, you
might
know
take her less seriously. And so,
why
when
would
she's
why
trying
I
to,
don't understand that. Why should you take someone less seriously because they danced on a video?
it's more about probably seeing her body, seeing her do these things that you'd associate with someone that is less or
So okay,
subservient.
so are we saying that a cop can't go to the beach?
No,
Is that the same thing?
no, I don't think it's the same thing.
If she posted videos to her social media of her in a bikini at the beach, oh, we've seen her body. Now we can't take her seriously as a cop anymore.
Yeah, but she's doing it. She's doing it in this, this dance way in a strip club setting. Like,
So it's
I
not
think it's
about her
gonna
body
be.
now. You're talking about the dance.
It's about all of it, I think. I think it's about, and you know what? To be fair, I think in society we do make this kind of invisible separation. Um, you just brought up this idea of at the beach in a bikini, right?
Mhm.
We look at a woman at the beach in a bikini and it's standard, it's normal.
Mhm.
If that same woman was standing outside in her bra and panties, which is exactly the same clothing, we're gonna look at that very differently.
Well, we might look at it like, is there something wrong with her mentally if she's just walking around the street dressed like that? Because most people don't do that.
But
That's
it's the exact, what if she went to the beach in her bra and panties? It's the exact same
okay.
clothing size and design,
Yeah,
but mentally as
I
society.
wouldn't even judge that or notice it, but I can see the case of why is she doing that? Because most people don't do it in that particular setting. So is something wrong? Is she just trying to be funny? Is she confused? Is she not smart enough to know the difference? You know what I mean? Like you might question that because it's out of the norm of what you would see in society. I understand that, but you wouldn't
Right.
be offended. I don't think.
Um, Not offended, but you might look at her a certain way. Society might look at her a certain way, even
Sure.
though bikini and bra and panties are basically the same thing.
Right. I mean, but just
Yeah.
because it's not the common attire you would see at that location. I mean, to me, that would be similar to someone, I don't know, showing up to the beach as a lawyer. Let's say I'm a lawyer. I show up in a full suit at the beach and I jump into the ocean. I dive into the ocean in my suit. You'd probably look at me the same kind of way as you would someone showing up with a bra and panties at the beach because it's just weird for that location, not because their body is being seen. Bodies are seen at the beach.
I think we associate underwear with something a little bit different than just different clothing.
I don't
It's
know.
something more intimate. It's something that's more private.
Even more intimate or private than a beach bikini, you think? Or a
I think
speedo?
we
People wear
hold it to
speedos at the
different
beach sometimes too.
I think we hold it to different standards. Like, imagine, like you said, a guy at the beach in Speedos, or a guy at the beach in, tidy whities. The Speedos has less clothing on it, but the tidy whities, we'd look at him dude, don't you have any sort of like decorum? Like, you're out here in your underwear. Like, what's wrong with you?
See, I don't really agree with that. I kind
I
of get
think as
where
a
you're going.
society in general, we do that.
I don't know if it's a matter of decorum though. I think it might be just weird, like not something
It's
you expect to
weird, but
see there, right? Like, but if they're covering up more of their body, like it wouldn't be like, oh, dude, take off the tidy whities and replace it with a speedo. That wouldn't make any sense because that's showing more. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't think that's what it is. I think it's just not the typical kind of attire we would associate with that setting.
I think it's part of it. I think it's part of it. But yeah, I mean, typically those are the same, it's the same attire. It's just the design may be different. When we're
Right.
talking
So why
like
should that
on,
matter? Right. When it comes to us being outraged, we're so outraged at the design being different. I mean, to me, that shows that it's phony outrage. It's not real.
well, that's what I'm saying. Like in society, we tend to do this, draw this, or separate these two as if they're very different when they could not be different at all, or it's what we associate with certain things.
Yeah,
Um,
I guess where you're getting at with that is when it comes to underwear or so-called intimate apparel, we're more
right,
likely to associate that with sex, and therefore that
right.
comes off as more salacious than a bikini would be, for example, at the beach.
And this type of dance,
Both
we
are
would
revealing,
more,
and that kind
yeah,
of
this type
dance
of dance, we would do the same
we would
thing.
associate with sex, and so we don't want, according to this logic, I guess, people who are serving the public to make us think of anything in the sexual realm. Is that kind of where that's going?
I think some of that could undermine the authority, the projection of authority that they do when they give out, when they're out in the street for some people. I
Um,
think, there's just definitely a higher standard for police officers, and we've seen teachers have the same thing. It happened something similar, and then they get fired or whatnot. I think when you have this
have we?
positions of trust,
Hold on a second, though, because I this is not hitting me right? Because when you talk about violating a position of trust, to me, that's about abusing someone, right? Touching a kid inappropriately, sending an inappropriate message to a kid, something like that, right? Or as a cop, it doesn't have to be a kid, but doing something unlawful, certainly, right? Something that violates them in some way. But when you're talking about performance art, to say that that's the same thing as breaking the public's trust, I have a serious problem with that.
yeah, but I think that's we expect them to act a certain way. We expect police officers to act a certain way.
A certain way, meaning what? Not be human beings, not
Uh,
be autistic.
well, it depends if some people won't characterize this as artistic. They characterize this as something dirty, something salacious,
Obscene. But see, that would be wrong. That would just be objectively wrong, right? And that's, I think, getting back to my original point about the type of entertainment you like to consume. It may not be everyone's choice of art, but it, without a doubt, is art. It's a dance. And again, it's not even a particularly dirty dance. You might say it's too dirty for your liking. You like it completely G rated. You want to be Disney approved, right? That's fine. Everyone has their different levels of what they are comfortable with. But to put this in the same category as obscenity is wrong from a legal perspective, right? That's just totally wrong. It's an art. It's objectively speaking, performance art.
right? Well, we put this to a poll,
Okay.
so let's go ahead and get into some of these results. So this was more of a general, but when I asked the poll, I used um, Detective Mercado's story as
Mm-hmm.
the reason why we were asking the poll. And the question we had was, should police officers enjoy freedom from professional consequences for partaking in lawful off-work activities?
Right.
I believe that was what the rest of it is. Lawful, yeah, off-work activities. Um, and so I gave three options here: yes, no, and depends on the activity.
I think
So,
the cop out depends on the activity. All right.
well, the idea was that if they had another activity, they would put it in the comments. But yes, no, it's not really realistic. I think sometimes there is a depends, you
No,
know,
but now hold on a second. What was the phrasing? Should they enjoy freedom from consequences
from professional
or
consequences.
professional consequences? So
Well,
yeah,
hey,
but
okay,
simply
here's the
yes or
thing.
no,
Well,
right?
here's the thing.
Yeah, it should be one or the other. It's, if you don't think they should enjoy that freedom, you would say no.
Well, I think it depends is a real good answer. For example,
No, then the answer is they should not.
well, sometimes they should, sometimes they shouldn't.
But that means
Like
that
I,
they
I
shouldn't.
wouldn't want, you know, the KKK marching, if they have the right permits, is legal.
Mhm.
I wouldn't want cops participating in that parade.
Do they not have a First Amendment right to do it?
They do, but I would
Yeah.
want consequences. I would want them off the force because that would show that they could be biased in how they do their duties.
So people only have a First Amendment right when they do things we agree with.
No,
Well, that's what you
but
seem to be
this
getting at.
that raises questions about their ability to fairly uh, perform their duties, and that's a legitimate concern. So yeah,
So
so I
then
would say it
their First
depends.
Amendment right would be overridden, you think, in that particular case?
If you mean if it went to court, I
Yeah.
I, I
Well, you
think
said what you would want the policy to be, right? I'm assuming you want the policy to be constitutional.
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I would want, but I would want, yeah, I would want them removed. I think there's a certain code of conduct that some things
Right.
are
So
a
that's
bit too
that's that's what I'm
far.
saying. So you think, despite that, the fact that they have a First Amendment right, in the case like that, you would think the other considerations would outweigh their freedom of
I
speech.
think I think so because it brings into, like I said, it brings into question your ability to, not saying they can't do it. It brings in their question that it brings into question their ability to um,
Be fair.
be fair in their duties and
And
in
you
their
think
responsibility to the public.
and you think dancing in a hip hop video is analogous to marching in a KKK march?
No, I don't. But I was saying that's why depends is a
Right.
viable answer.
Right. But see, I would just categorize that as no, I guess, because I'm thinking freedom from professional consequence means always. And so if there are exceptions to it, the answer is just no. But all right, we'll see how
All
the
right.
comments show.
So we got 38% said yes, they should enjoy freedom from professional consequences. 19% said no, and 44% says depends on the activity.
44% says depends on the activity. So, all right, do you have any interesting comments on this?
Well, some person said she ought to be able to smoke a joint off duty as well. It's legal there. I don't think that's in question. Someone says, I find myself torn on this one. She has rights, but maybe limits on what she can do in public. This would apply to anyone with a job that needs public trust. And then he goes into an example of his mother was nearly fired from her teaching job in the early 1930s after she was found wearing shorts inside her own home on her day off.
And that violates the public trust.
In the 1930s, yes, it did, apparently.
That's crazy.
So,
And hopefully, see, and I guess this is maybe what I'm getting at with all this. So that was a sign of the times, right? Society or whatever was out
right.
would be outraged to learn
Sure.
that.
Sure,
Now,
sure.
hopefully, we can look back at that and realize that's ridiculous, right? Someone
Yeah,
wearing shorts in their house makes you untrustworthy. That's absolutely ridiculous, right?
sure.
I look at this situation as the same as that. I understand society is not in the same exact place, but
Right.
I would hope that we can look back on this in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and be like, yo, people were tripping over someone dancing in a video. That was crazy. What were they thinking in 2025? You know?
I don't know if we'll ever get to that part. I don't know. We got another comment here. Someone says, in the NYPD example, I'd be a little wary of slut shaming. I know U.S. police officers have much wider latitude for outside employment. Seeing off-duty cops in uniform with guns working outside Florida nightclubs was a bit of a WTF moment for me. But there is nothing immoral about dancing, even in skimpy clothing. I see no real reason why she shouldn't carry on with it.
Exactly. I mean, are we this puritanical as a society? I didn't think we were. And that's a good point. What about in the 90s when you had death row records? They had how many off-duty cops in their entourage
Right.
defending them, right?
That's a good, and they were clearly, there was clearly criminal activity taking place around death row.
Right, right. And I don't
Why were
recall
they not
seeing,
reprimanded for not
yeah,
dealing with that?
right. I don't recall seeing a whole lot of outrage about that. That is
No.
more deserving of outrage than someone dancing in a video. Are you kidding me? I mean, where are our
Right.
priorities here?
All right. Um, Now this is from a former law enforcement officer. And it said, I was a law enforcement officer. It was emphasized at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Academy that this job is 24/7. Once sworn in, you are always an officer. Um, and then he goes on to a example that once he was off duty and something happened, he assisted, and then when he then passed it off to cops that were on duty, he went back to his office later the next day, and then he had to file for overtime work because he did do some work. So he's saying, so I would say no, they don't have the freedom. At least in Washington, a law enforcement officer is an officer at all times. Your off-duty behavior can get you disciplined or fired.
Okay, it's an interesting point to bring up, right? Because we made the distinction between being on duty and off duty. And
Right.
there was a point here that you're always on duty even when you're off. But where is the line drawn, right? Again,
Right.
if we're going to consider this to be lawful and not immoral, not an outrage, not offensive, generally speaking, right? Then why should it be subject to discipline?
Um, well, yeah, I mean, if we take this guy's definition of a law enforcement officer is on duty 24/7, then you would have to ask, would it be okay if she was wearing her uniform while doing this and having the
Well,
booty clapped and stuff?
but see, I don't think that's exactly the same though, because if she was in her uniform, it adds another layer to it, right? Because now it's kind of advertising the fact
Right.
that she is a cop in the
Right.
video, and it's maybe even making it look like the department is co-signing what she's doing, right? Like
Right.
it's
And from what I read, it seemed like even the music artist didn't know she was a cop until this came out.
right, right. So
So it's not
yeah,
like she went in there and was like, "Hey, I'm Detective so and so.
yeah,
Let's make this happen."
yeah, hold my badge. Yeah.
Yeah,
Let me
yeah, yeah.
on the table. Yeah,
So
let me.
she went in as a model that was cast from a legitimate casting agency to do a job.
Right.
And at least from the comments, not comments, but from the reporting and stuff that I read, that was just how it went down.
So we haven't even brought up this element of it. There's a lot of talk about the need for police officers to be more in touch with the communities that they're serving, right? People
Okay,
talk
where are you
about,
going with this? Where are you going with this? This could go so many different ways.
well, no, because as you may know, there's a controversy over can police officers serve precincts where they live? And the policy has been no, and there's different reasons. They
Mhm.
fear corruption or retribution or different things. But
Sure.
the flip side to that has always been you want officers who can relate to the people because of the concerns of abuse, right? Really on both sides, right? You want to have a
Mhm.
good relationship between the officers and the people that they're serving. So why is it that we have all these calls out there for cops who can relate to the people more and for the people to relate to them more? But when they do something that emphasizes their own humanity and even embraces the local culture, right? New York is hip hop culture, they get reprimanded for it. And so we're saying that we want them to be further removed from the people by doing that, right? I mean, here's someone who is in a hip hop video garnering millions of views. That should be celebrated and that should be looked at as, wow, that's the kind of cop I want serving my community because she's less likely to harass a random black person on the corner.
Why? Because she was dancing in the video?
Because she seems she at least is embracing on some level hip hop culture. She's not someone who looks at it like it's all alien to her.
That doesn't necessarily say that though. I mean, it just could say that she accepted a job for the check. Doesn't mean that she's embracing the culture or that she cares about the music or even the artist. It
Okay, it doesn't
just
necessarily mean that, but isn't it more likely though to have someone who is a model who dances in videos? And again, this is a performance art piece, so that she is using her creative side, right, to do this. It isn't just like, oh, just give me a check and I'll take my clothes off for you. No, this is actually a performance that she's doing here. This is art,
yeah,
right?
so that doesn't mean that she has to care about the art or anything. She just went there to perform for the check, possibly.
Possibly, but what I'm saying is she's actually performing in art. And so I don't think we should assume that most artists are just in it for the check. Artists are artists, and she's engaging in the culture in that way. Wouldn't you prefer that? Wouldn't you rather officers who were more in touch with hip hop culture than who were ignorant to it?
Yes, but I think there's definitely I don't know if that's kind of a I don't know if that's an apt connection as far as her being in the video dancing and being connected to the culture and to the community. Like I don't know if that
It doesn't necessarily establish that, but I'm saying it seems like that's more of what we want to see than someone who would see a hip hop video and be like, oh, look at these guys. They're all thugs. They're all animals. She's not behaving that way. She's behaving in a more
right.
humane way that seems, you know what I mean? We don't know what her true intentions are. Maybe she's in it for the check, whatever. But it just seems like someone who would do that kind of performance would be more likely to be in touch with the people on the ground.
I don't know. I don't think it says that necessarily. I
Really?
think you could try to pull that out of it, but I don't think it necessarily says that because in the,
It, it
she's
doesn't I think it
in
necessarily
a
says,
performer. She's a performer. So
yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that the setting or anything is an endorsement of the setting or whatever it is. She's a performer
Still,
doing her art where
okay.
she's hired to go to.
Still, even if you're going to take it that cynically, she got hired to go there. She took the job, and now she probably thinks of that setting a little bit more fondly because she got paid to do it and she got all these views from it.
I don't know. I don't know.
And I
I
don't
don't
think
know.
that's necessary. I wouldn't assume that's the case either. That could be in some cases, but I don't
Yeah.
think we're saying that it has to be 100% one or the other. We're, on the other side, people who don't like hip hop aren't necessarily going to mistreat people either. We're not saying that. But what I'm just
Right.
saying is, right, it at least is an embracing of her humanity and the culture on a certain level. And I think we want to see more of that. Even just take it away from hip hop, right? Forget about that it's hip hop. Forget that it's even dancing. Just the fact that she is doing something in the artistic world, right? In the creative space, to me, is a sign of greater humanity than someone who's completely out of touch with that.
Yeah, I can see that in the most generalist of senses, sure. Um, but I mean it becomes kind of it comes a little bit of a self-serving argument or flimsy argument to just say anyone participating in the arts in general in that case. I mean, if you go there, we could say, okay, maybe what if she had an OnlyFans where she was, masturbating on camera? She's doing it in private of her
That's
own home. It's a private stream. It's an artistic interpretation of whatever she's doing.
no, that's a false equivalency though, because there's a
Okay,
difference, even from a
what
legal
if
perspective.
what if
It's
she's a
not
porn
obscene.
actress?
It's not obscene. It's not pornographic, right? Those and those things. If it's just sex on camera, then they don't have artistic value inherently. I mean, it could be a mixture of both or whatever, right? But those are two
Why not?
distinct things. Those are two distinct things. And in this case, there isn't the obscenity. There isn't the pornographic material or content. There is just the artistic dancing. You might not like that kind of dancing or whatever, but it isn't pornographic by any stretch.
Well, what if they are doing a pornographic video where they are playing a character and they're actually doing some acting and there's sex involved? Like, is
Well,
that
then
not art?
you can separate the two things. Yes, the acting part of it, I think, would be good. You could have a further discussion about whether it would be inappropriate for her to engage in pornography, but that's not what this is. And so it's a false
No,
equivalency to say because she danced in a strip club like setting, we're going to compare her to a porn actress.
I'm saying as far as calling it art in that sense. So,
But that isn't necessarily art, though. So
in
I
the
would
porn
not use that
industry, they
as
consider it art. We call them actors and actresses. They are artists in
there
that
is
sense. So,
but there's an actual legal standard for obscenity though, and there could be some blurring of the lines there, right? So then you can separate the two, but I don't think it's a fair comparison to say why is it that we're going to the porn comparison for someone in a hip hop video automatically. Would you do the same thing if she was a rapper?
if it was a rapper, depending on what her lyrics were, I would go and say, well, what are they talking about? Are they talking about, running up and shooting their ops? Like, I don't want cops rapping that type of music. I know they have artistic expression, but
Right.
if
And
you're
see,
in
in
the
a case like
police,
that, I think we will be able to separate those two things out and say, on the
right,
one hand, it is a good thing that she is artistic and maybe she's doing it in an artistic way, and we like that about it, but we
right,
don't like the content of it given who she is and what her job is. I think it's okay to have that discussion and look at it in two different ways, right? You can separate
right.
things out from that. But that's not what this is, unless we're prepared to say that she was doing something obscene or pornographic. I watched it. It seemed pretty innocent for what it was.
Yeah, listen, I like I said last week, there wasn't a lot of um, you know, it wasn't like simulated touching or
Right.
any of that. There wasn't simulated sex acts. She wasn't even like grinding on the guy. There were only a couple of scenes of them together. Mostly it was just her dancing and the cameraman
Right.
getting different shots of her. So no, the reason I brought the porn up is because the argument you were making is that art in general, and so in that case, we could also, some would say that pornography would also be considered art, or even, you know, posing nude and this, that. But some would have an
That's
issue with that. I think it has to be a little
that's
bit more
that's
defined than this.
that's taking it to the lowest common denominator, though. And again, we could say yes, we
I think
agree.
your mic fell down a little bit.
Was better.
Yeah, there we go.
We could say that we like someone who is artistic or creative,
Right,
but don't like every aspect of the performance, or don't agree with the medium.
right.
That's
So,
fine. But I think the point stands that if the whole agenda here, if the whole goal is to get more people serving us, and maybe not just as cops, serving the public, we want people who can relate to people more, right? Who are more real, who have experience in the communities, who are more in touch with humanity, their own
I don't know
humanity,
if this would
not
be the
just humanity.
example.
But what I'm saying is, I think we want more real people. We want people who are, for example, in the arts. That doesn't mean that everybody is equally as appropriate to be. I'm just saying, generally speaking, I think we want people who have that kind of background. I think that's a good thing. I
Sure.
think that's a positive thing.
Sure, I think everyone should have some kind of connection with the arts. I agree with that there. I don't know if this is a prime example of something in that regard. Um,
Just because why? Why? Because it's hip hop? Because it's
no, not
music?
because it's hip hop.
So what is the objection there?
What is the objection? Um, because of her position
Mm-hmm.
and because of her being in the video, doing what most society considers to be something that's uh what's not necessarily, I guess, less than, or is not on the up and
It's
up.
it's
It's
dancing. You really think most
I
of
get
society?
that.
You really think most of society thinks dancing is less than? That's crazy.
Dancing in a strip club, or
It's so I don't know.
shaking your stuff.
I
Like,
find it so
come
hard
on,
to
just
believe in
be
the year 2025. What was the song "Shake Your Tail Feather" by Nelly in like 1997 or something
listen,
like
let's flip it.
2005, whatever it was, 20 plus years ago? Like,
Let's flip it. If this wasn't a woman, if this was a male
uh
cop,
huh,
and he was doing this like a Chippendales dancer, and all he's wearing is like a little sock covering his thing, and he's
right,
flipping it around, and he's shaking his stuff on
yep,
the on stage. I
yep.
think we'd have the same situation.
Nope. Nope. I think not one person will complain. And I think that's part
I
of
think
the
we would.
sexism here. I think this is a sexist. So I'm going to look at my comments here. I got a comment saying it's so sexist and so dumb. I agree. I think sexism plays a role here. I think
I don't
racism,
doubt that. I
I
don't
think,
doubt that.
and this is why I'm saying if it was a male cop doing what you described, like, for example, we just talked about the firefighters last week with the calendar that they do, right?
Right.
They strip, they take their clothes off on the calendar. They do strip dances, teases, whatever. No one says it's inappropriate. But when a woman does it,
Right.
it suddenly becomes inappropriate. So I don't think if it was a male cop, it would have been a story at all. No, I don't. Uh, Ray here says, and they legit wonder why no one wants to serve as a police officer. Kind of related to my point about how we're saying we want people to serve us who are more human. And then when we get one, we like, no, we really don't want that. We want them to be disconnected from that. There's an interesting comment here on the other side. Jeff, who, by the way, has been a guest on Nuance before, says, no, you cannot be a public servant and do this behavior. You are vulnerable to extortion, duress,
Mm,
and blackmail.
mm.
This is something she needs to do not in the public eye. No way a police officer should be conducting themselves like this, and they're seen in public all the time. And so I had a
Mm.
question, which I didn't get to respond to because someone else actually responded for me. Evan says, if it's out in the open, then how could she be vulnerable to extortion? Exactly. How could you extort someone for doing something that's on YouTube getting millions of views? Oh, if you don't do something for me, then I'm gonna post this link that's already been posted over 1 million times. And what is that? How is that extortion?
Yeah, someone put left a comment with a similar in the similar vein, and they said, in this one, I can see an angle where defense attorneys could try to compromise her on the witness stand, um, because of this activity. And this issue could be solved by transferring her to any other unit than sex crimes.
Well, that's what happened.
Right, that's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, but making an issue on the witness stand based on the fact
Yeah,
that
I'm not
she danced in a video. What are we
but
talking
I
about?
think that's similar in vein to that idea. Like this could be used against her in her duties.
How? You got to be crazy to
I'm
think.
not sure how this will be used on the witness stand though.
Yeah, it's absolutely lunacy just to suggest that.
I
So,
think they try to maybe paint it as a judgment call.
like she's insane, so you can't believe what she says because she danced. I mean, come on, this is really what we're reducing ourselves to. So they're going back and forth now, and my thread here about what it means to extort someone. So when
Mm.
Evan asks if it's out in the open, how could it be extortion? Jeff just gives the definition, and he says the practice of obtaining something, especially money, through force or threats. Evan comes back and says, I understand what extortion is, but it really doesn't seem that you do. The key
Uh-oh.
element is the threat of revealing compromising information. And if there's nothing new to reveal, there is no leverage with which to extort.
Right.
And Jeff comes back and he says, how do you know she's not a part of a ring? How do we know she's not being pimped? Evan responds, you have quite the imagination there.
Oh
So
yeah, we know in this case because she was cast by a legitimate casting agency.
it's absolutely insane to suggest, and I love Jeff, but this thought process doesn't make any kind of sense. To suggest that because she was dancing in a video, we should presume she's part of a prostitution ring.
Well, I think that's yeah, we especially in New York where there's a lot of entertainment going on, a lot of, acting and performing and whatnot. Um, yeah, but I think that also can be indicative of how some might view this kind of dancing and this kind of attire for someone in law enforcement in the general public. There are going to be people looking at that a certain way. Like I would think, for example, you can go down and you go down into the Bible Belt.
Mm-hmm.
She'd probably be crucified for this. Like, yeah, you're definitely getting off the force for this. No, you're against God and
Isn't
this and
it?
that. Um,
Isn't that part of Southern culture, strip club culture? They used to tell me that, which I never really understood because I'm not from the South, I guess, right? But they would say, you know, a song is good when it sounds
sure.
good at the strip club. And I'm like, what does a strip club got to do with whether a song sounds good? Like that was the litmus test for for the South culturally, I guess, or a lot of
Atlanta, Florida, they do.
right,
Yeah, there's a lot of
right,
that.
right. And so if it's so ingrained in the local culture there, you're to tell me someone will be crucified for doing a dance again. She's not actually stripping in the video. She's not getting naked.
No,
But
she's
she's
not
doing a dance
stripping into it.
that looks like or I guess is inspired by strip club dancing, if you want to put it like
It
that.
looks like the
Yeah,
setting is a strip
yeah,
club.
yeah.
There's
And
a
the
pole there.
parking,
She's
right?
yeah.
Yeah. But okay, so you're saying in the South it would be received worse, even though it's so much a bigger part of their culture.
Yeah, I think so because strip club culture is still it's still like, subculture, I think would be a lot of calls from mainstream culture for her to
Hmm.
have face some sort of disciplinary action, especially if you're talking Bible Belt type of situation. Just the fact that she's
Okay.
got no clothes on or she's wearing bikini essentially, there'd be some sort of an issue there.
Yeah, I guess I can see that with certain segments of society, right? And then I guess it would be like you said, the more Bible thumping folks, I guess, against the more hip hop oriented people, right? Because like I
I don't
said,
know
I
if
was
just be hip hop. It could just
well,
be people in general that just don't seem to see an issue with it.
well, what I mean is that I'm always told that hip hop in the South has to pass the strip club test. So it was never presented to me as something that was looked at as on the outskirts of society or the underground
Right.
society. It seemed to be so mainstream and accepted by the general public.
Well, I think that's kind of a misnomer because that would be maybe within the hip hop community in or the urban community
Mm-hmm.
in the South. That's not
Okay.
the general public at large. That's inside of another so-called sub community.
Which is why I said it would maybe be a clash of the more hip hop minded community versus the Bible thumping community in the South.
It could be something similar to that, yeah. Or not just the hip hop community, but people who just think like, okay, so what? She's dancing. Maybe not into hip hop. Maybe they're
Right.
just like, yeah, so
Right.
what? I don't care, whatever. You
Right.
know,
Okay.
so
Yeah. And that's to me, that's where everyone should be on this, whether it's your type of deal or not. Because even though I'm from within hip hop, I'm not from that sub genre, right? If you want to
right.
call it that. I watched this video. It's not my kind of thing. The music isn't my type of song, and the
Yeah,
dancing
let's say there. The music was kind of whack.
and the dancing isn't my kind of dancing. So don't get it twisted and think like, oh, I'm saying like I love this. This isn't my deal. I don't like it. It's not my thing, right? And I don't like going to strip clubs. I never
So did
liked
you?
that whole scene. I just not
Yeah,
for
it was never
not for me,
interesting.
right?
Yeah.
And like we said, I do even see how it can be looked at as degrading in a sense. But at the same time, adults are adults and they're free to make decisions they want to make, and they're free to perform the kind of art they want to perform. And I don't think we as a society should be trying to chastise people for participating in art. And I think especially is the case when it comes to public servants, that we want to embrace their participation in the arts, whatever they're doing artistically. Now, you
Mm.
want to take it immediately to OnlyFans and porn, and I don't think that's an appropriate comparison. I think, yeah, there could be some artistic value in some of that stuff too, but there's also the obscenity issue, and those are two different things. In this case, she's not naked. She's not doing anything pornographic. She's just dancing. And are we prepared to say you shouldn't be a cop anymore because you danced? To me, that's insane. And I think that's a big problem with the fabric of our society, that there are some people acting that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people would consider this obscene. Um,
It's not.
so
It is not, though. You can look at the Supreme Court case
I'm
law
just saying
not
this
to
would
find
be, this would be considered a not safe for work video. It's not something that
it.
you would
Okay,
show your children. This would
so what?
some people would draw that line.
So is stand-up comedy in many cases. So if
Absolutely.
an officer told dirty jokes on stage, they can't be a cop now. I mean, I mean, what are we doing with
That's a
this?
little different, but
Is it?
yeah,
Is it?
I think so.
I
It
don't think. I
and
actually.
I think you know what? I think in that scenario,
Uh-huh.
there would be some instances where a cop would get in trouble for the jokes that they told.
Maybe if they said something that made it sound like they weren't doing their job as a cop, right? Like if they joked about they're breaking the law or they're arresting the wrong people on
Something
purpose.
like that, or I think there could be a situation would be some kind of outrage if there was like overtly sexist or overt talking about, like how Dave Chappelle goes in on trans
Mhm.
folks or LGBTQ. If there was a police officer doing jokes like that, even though they were jokes, I could see how there might be some outrage because of their position.
Maybe. I
I'm not
guess
saying it should.
I guess it
Whether it
depends
should
on
or not is a
what
different
they
is
say.
a different thing,
The
but
problem is that we have so much phony and manufactured outrage now that
absolutely.
I have a tendency to want to push back against all of it, and I do
Right.
want to stand up for people's First Amendment rights. Now, the other side to that is, as a police officer, they're working for the government, and so
Right.
it isn't just a matter of their First Amendment rights is what is the government doing? What are they doing on behalf of the
Right.
government? Where are they taking the government, right? And so, for example, the government isn't allowed to endorse one religion over another, right? And so
Right.
if it's a police officer now making jokes about, I don't know, I like this religion, these people over here have a stupid religion, whatever, some stupid joke like that. Okay, on the one hand, maybe they have a First Amendment right to free speech, but now they're taking the government into a discriminatory direction when it comes to religion, which in itself is unconstitutional, right? So there
Even
is
if
that,
they're off duty
even if they're off duty.
and they're not in uniform,
I would say potentially, right? Because you know that they're a cop still.
how would you know if they don't say it when they come on stage?
Oh, well, if you don't know, you don't know what I'm saying. But if you do know, if
Right.
if people know that, right,
Well,
especially if
so
they're
it's what it sounds like you're saying that they would be scrutinized for doing this, even if they're off duty and they're not in uniform, which is the same thing as her being scrutinized, even though
no,
she's
it's
off
not.
duty and not in uniform.
She's not favoring one religion over another. She's not.
Now, not favoring one religion, but as far as her actions, that comedian, his actions are
Uh,
scrutinized, even though they're not in uniform and they're off duty, whereas hers, again, same situation. It still seems to be there's a point where they can be scrutinized for doing something when off duty.
scrutinized how legally, in terms of repercussions, in terms of some idiots online getting the definition of extortion wrong. I mean, scrutinized how?
Oh wow, shots fired. He caught a stray on that one.
You know what I mean? I mean, everything is subject to being scrutinized on some level. But what I was talking about is the tension constitutionally between the officer's First Amendment rights
Right.
and the First Amendment rights of the people, if you wished, right?
I think, yeah. No,
Right?
go. I
Because
was gonna say,
yeah,
no, go ahead.
no, I was just saying because we collectively, as a people, have First Amendment rights that are supposed to protect us from the government. And as an officer, they are an agent of the government. And so if they're getting on stage saying, "Oh, I'm going out and arresting people who follow this religion because their religion is so stupid," well, now our First Amendment rights to practice religion are being threatened by this officer. And so,
Right.
that becomes a problem from a legal perspective. But
Right.
if they're not doing that, then I would be more kind and more sympathetic to their own rights to do a comedy show, to express themselves artistically, whatever the case may be, especially if it's outside the confines of their job. Now, yes, as we've established, there can be some gray area there because
Mhm.
even when they're off duty, if we know that they're a cop, and like you pointed out, this commenter wrote earlier that they're supposed to be on duty even when they're off duty. All right, so that makes it more of a gray area. Now, you can't take that to the extreme either, right? Because are we going to say a cop who goes to church personally is breaking the rules or is violating
They're showing a
outright?
bias.
They're
They're showing
showing
a bias.
right, they're showing a bias. Wait a minute, they're always on duty. So does that mean that the cop is saying the church is better than the temple or whatever? We're not going to
Right.
go that far, right? We're going to still
Right.
allow them to live their life. I think that's
Right.
kind of the general point here.
Right. Right. So, yeah, interesting discussion here. Um, how many times did you watch the video?
Less than one. I would say no. I think I watched it all the way through once.
Okay, okay.
I was
But
trying
yeah,
to figure
after
out.
the 24th time watching, I
Yeah,
just didn't
right.
see anything wrong with it.
I might have turned it off before I got to the end, but I think I probably got to the end because I wanted to have a nuanced discussion on this, and I didn't see anything. I was waiting. I was waiting for the offensive part,
No, I told
and
you
I
it
was
was
like,
nothing
"This is
like,
what we're being." So here's the point. The last point I wanted to bring in. I was doing election law work over the weekend, and sometimes we throw on a movie or TV shows in the background, right? Just
hmm.
to kind of have something playing as we do a lot of this work on getting petitions and compliance and things that might be considered boring unless you find ways to entertain yourself as you do this for hours on end, right?
Right.
So one of the things we put on when we had a bunch of us in the room doing this work was Honora, which won Best Picture at the Oscars, right? And I have to say, I do want to go back and watch it when I can focus on it, when I can actually pay attention to it, because I couldn't pay much attention because it was just background viewing while I was working. But from what I saw of it, I did like it. It was different. And I understand it was an indie film, maybe more low
Mhm.
budget, which is why it looked a little different. It didn't look like a typical movie. It wasn't very cinematic. or epic looking. It wasn't shot in what you would call a beautiful or awe-inspiring way, right? It looked kind of like a low budget indie film, almost had the quality of a YouTube vlog, right? Like
Mm.
um, following these characters around New York as they get into different adventures type thing. So it was kind of set up to look more authentic, I guess, in that respect, more
Mm-hmm.
right, more real. But I enjoyed that about it. The thing that I noticed though, as it relates to this discussion, was the main character, played by Mikey Madison.
Mm-hmm.
She just won Best Actress for her portrayal in this movie. She's the first Gen Z actor to win an Academy Award for acting overall,
Mm-hmm.
right? So big historic moment. Her character in this movie did the same exact kind of dancing as you saw in this hip hop video. Same deal, right? It was pretty much exactly the same. Now, I could be wrong on this. I don't think I am. I don't think anybody is saying she acted inappropriately for her portrayal of this character. And I think we talked about this last week as well. If it was in a movie, no one would have a complaint. She's celebrated now. She won Best Actress. Her movie just won Best Picture at the Academy Awards for doing the same kind of dancing. And so we're sitting here, we're saying that, well, society shuns this. This is part of the underworld. This is immoral. This is something that's like so outrageous and shocking and offensive to us. We literally just celebrated her as the best actress at the Academy Awards, the Oscars,
I think
for
that's a
doing the
little
same thing,
different.
for doing the same thing. And by the way, if she were to run for office, if she were to say, I want to be a cop, would anybody be saying, oh, but you danced? No one would be saying that, right? So why is it that this officer is scrutinized? Is it because it's hip hop? Is it because she's a person of
Nah,
color? That's what I'm asking.
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that.
So what's the
Uh,
difference?
I think there's a slight difference there. The other one is an actress. That's her profession. And I know you're saying like this she was cast in a legitimate, so she's also a performer, a
Right,
legitimate performer.
right.
That's not in question there. But she also has this other responsibility that she's in too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's I don't think the comparisons are exactly the same. I'm trying to think of something that might be questioned. Maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger being governor. He killed like thousands of people in his movies. It just murder, just very graphic
Was
murders.
there outrage over him running for governor?
No, there was not.
So what's the difference? In fact,
Yeah.
my recollection of this is that a porn star, maybe I'm wrong, but I seem to remember hearing that a porn star came in second place in that race.
Uh, in one of those races, yes. Yes. Yeah.
So why is there outrage now? Again, is it because she's in a hip hop video doing this?
I don't think it's a hip hop thing.
You don't. So if
I
she
don't think
was
it's a hip
in,
hop thing.
so okay, what if she got cast to play Honora and she was a cop? She was a cop, but she got plastic. She was cast to play the leading role in this movie. Would there be outrage?
Um, I don't think as much.
So what's the
I think there
difference?
might be by some, but
Mhm.
not as much because we would see the medium different, I think. I think
So isn't that a hip
society
hop? Isn't that a
sees
hip hop thing? Isn't that a hip hop thing?
I think society sees a music video as a different medium than a movie, a
I
film,
agree.
especially if it's an artistic, so to speak, film.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think there'd be an issue with that as much. Some people, of course, but
Yeah. So do you see why this comes off as phony performative outrage to me when we're saying, well, the medium is different and therefore that elevates it to outrageousness? Really? The
it
medium is
could
different.
be.
That's why we're offended because it's a movie versus a music video.
It could be. So, yeah, I think there's just some of it's going to be perception.
What if it was a rock video?
I think it'd be the same.
I think you're bugging. I think
I think
you're
it'd be the same.
I don't think it would be the same by any
If
stretch
she
of the
was doing the same thing, wearing
yeah,
the same thing in
yeah,
a rock video,
yeah.
I think it'd be the same. And I get what you're saying that there is a bias against hip hop, that's I don't think it's up for debate. Um, but I think in this situation, there
There's a
would
guy
be,
in Times Square called the Naked Cowboy who's like naked playing guitar on the street.
but he's not a cop.
I don't think anyone would object to him being a cop unless they didn't like his politics. I think he maybe was a Tea Party guy. Maybe you'd have that stuff come up. But would people say, would people legitimately say because he was playing the guitar half naked, he can't be a cop? And like really mean that? Or would that just be a political football to try to attack him because they don't like his politics or whatever?
I think it's different. It's a cop.
I guess
Yeah.
I'm just not getting why a cop can't dance or have less clothes on in a video, but someone else can.
Yeah.
I don't see that. I don't see people. It goes back to trust. How is that breaking the trust? In fact, they're showing more of themselves, and so shouldn't we trust them more? I mean, they're hiding a lot less. I mean, that woman, if she's dancing like that in that attire, it doesn't have any like drugs on her that she's going to plant on you, right?
So should all cops just wear that as the uniform?
Maybe, right? I mean, it's
Just put the badge on the strap, and then
yeah.
they might have to reinforce the bottoms so that they can hold the holster.
You know what I mean? Like, what are we talking about here? This is just sounds crazy to me. Someone said it was a hedonism issue.
I think that's part of it.
So someone's so Dan says lack of decorum and classiness is exactly what
Right.
has deteriorated the overall moral fiber in this land. Sorry about your hedonism, Mike Scala. Sorry about my hedonism.
I think that's the crux of why this is different, and for someone that's a police officer.
But
So
we haven't even gotten to the bottom of why it is different, though. Like we're saying, if it's fine to do in a movie, but not in a music video.
I'm saying that it would probably be viewed a little bit differently.
Right? Isn't that crazy? Doesn't it just show
It,
how
I think
stupid the
there's a
whole thing is in the
discussion.
first
There
place?
could be a discussion for that, but I think if we look at what how society views things and how society looks at different treats different things, like they would look at this differently than they would look at it as a whether it was a Hollywood feature or an art piece film type of thing, you
And
know?
doesn't that break down the entire argument? I mean, doesn't that just reduce it to this being such a stupid thing to be upset about?
Um, could be, you know, it could be. I think there's, it's obviously a discussion to be had about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just wish we could do better as a society. Yeah, I really do. The fact that there are people upset about this, but I also want to know how many people really are upset about it.
And it could
Yeah,
be it,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, a few people could have complained. Someone at the department is thinking this could be an optics issue,
yeah.
and they might not even have an issue with it. And they're like, okay, we just need to do something because the optics, and then,
Right. All right. Well, if maybe people weren't, but see, this is it gets back to agendas here. People having one agenda but trying to push a narrative that they may not even really believe in just to suit their agenda. Because I was going to say, as a society, if we would stop being so stuffy about this kind of thing, then it wouldn't be an optics problem, right? People weren't complaining in the first place, and it couldn't be an optics issue. But might people be complaining because they know that the complaints are going to register it as an optics issue, and therefore by complaining they're able to get what they want, like for example a person of color off the force. Maybe they're anti DEI and they think that that's the issue here, and so that's really their goal, right? Their underlying agenda is maybe they want more white cops or more male cops. Maybe they think men should be suited to do this job, not women. Whatever their agenda is, right? Could they then say we're outraged over this cop who happens to be a woman of color and happens to be in a hip hop video dancing, and they're not really outraged over it, but they're just raising that because they know that it becomes an optics issue and then something is done about it. Because what happened she got thrown off the special victims unit.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this is, part of why I'm so, I don't want to say incensed or outraged myself, but I'm so eager, I guess, to push back against this outrage, because I see a lot of it as performative and phony and agenda based. Honestly, some of it maybe even subconscious, right? People having their biases and acting like they're the righteous ones when they should be looking in the mirror themselves.
Fair point.
All right. Well, we talked for quite some time on this. We do have to go here soon, but we did want to talk about something else, which we could set up now and then maybe follow up on next week, right?
Hmm.
And it's a further discussion of the mayor's race as we've been covering here, but we wanted to look at it from the angle of policy and how it seems like a lot of these candidates are not really running on policy, right? We saw
Right.
a few weeks ago, I think it was DC 37 had a debate and they were asked questions. And all right, they're getting up there and they're giving a little soundbite answers, but are they really differentiating themselves from each other? Could you walk out of that room as a spectator saying, I know how Brad Lander differs from Michael Blake. I know where they stand on the issues, and I know which one of these candidates are more aligned with me than others on issues I care about. You know what I mean? I'm
Right.
not getting a whole lot of that from most of these candidates. I know, broadly speaking, you're seeing Cuomo, for example, try to occupy that moderate to centrist lane in the Democratic Party. You're seeing Zoran Mamdani really now occupying a big chunk of that progressive leftist lane, and the other
Mm.
candidates seemingly falling by the wayside. Maybe a big reason is because Cuomo and Zamdani are defining themselves more in terms of their ideology than others are. Maybe others are either trying to be too cautious or just not doing enough to really put their ideas, their ideology out there in a way that defines them, right? That makes them different from any other center left or left of center Democrat running in a primary. So what I did want to do is actually break down some of these candidates' policy positions, right? Because they do have websites, they do have ideas out there. Maybe we can kind of get a sense as to where they differ since they're not doing a great job differentiating themselves. We can do more of that next week. But I will say that Zoran does seem to be the candidate to be centering his campaign more around policy as opposed to the others. And we may
Right.
disagree with a lot of that policy, and maybe we agree with a lot of it too, but he's at least running what appears to be an ideas driven campaign. And one of the more
With some
controversial,
specifics.
right, one of the more controversial plans, just to give you an idea of what's going on, he's, for example, calling for government owned grocery stores. Now, some people might think that's crazy talk. That sounds like communism, whatever. You can pick
Right.
apart that from 1,000 different angles. And I'm not saying I endorse that by any stretch of the imagination. But what I am saying is he's at least putting ideas out there that
Hmm.
define him as a candidate. And you can say, okay, if I vote
Right.
for him, I'm voting for these ideas as opposed to just voting for what the personality or the popularity of the candidate or whatever. So Cuomo, I think he's kind of being pegged as the guy who wants more cops on the street. Okay, that's an idea. Does he have a lot more? He seems to be standing more for rhetoric, and he did have some good lines. He gave a speech over the weekend, I believe, it might have been yesterday, where he said Democrats lost the last election. It wasn't that Republicans won; it was that Democrats lost. And he said
Right.
that they are too on the ideal world and not living enough in the real world. That's a good line. That's good messaging. I agree with that. I
Right.
like
Sure.
that. I still want to see more concrete policy proposals, right?
Right.
So we can get into all of this in much greater detail next week. Maybe for a poll, I was just thinking we can ask the people if they would want to see candidates lead with policy more. Would that be a fair question to put out?
I think so. I think so. Like, because, uh, a lot of our campaigning and campaign season has kind of been taken over with performance
Hmm.
and spectacle and rhetoric. And we've, talked about that multiple times as far as, like you said, give some real issues, some real concrete points. So,
Right.
yeah, I think that'd be a fair question.
All right. So how do we phrase it? Do you want to see more of a focus on policy than personality, or popular, maybe policy over popularity? Would that be one way to phrase it?
Um,
Or just would you rather see, or do you think candidates should be focusing more on policy than they currently do, or something like that?
yeah, or like a return to
Mm.
focusing more on policy than on personality or spectacle or, yeah, something along those lines, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
'Cause I think a lot of people are fed up with some of the political discourse
Right. Right.
and burnt out is I think is
I
very
think
apt.
so
A lot of
too.
people are
I think
burnt
so too.
out,
Right. Right.
you know.
All right. So why don't we try this? The poll question of the week is: do you believe that candidates and campaigns should focus more on policy ideas than they currently do?
Okay, yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. So we'll
Yeah.
put that out there and we'll see what people say. And then next week, we'll have a more detailed discussion on that and the particular policy proposals of the mayoral candidates here in New York City.
Right, yeah. Actually, the one that we were looking at from Mamdani,
Yeah.
I like. I like. So we can get into
So,
that.
yeah, we'll get into all that next week. Of course, bottom line, do we have a bottom line for this?
Bottom line, um, something about the about
Listen, I liked the idea from earlier where I said this is being framed as a trust issue. This police officer, and it sounds funny, right? But I also mean this in a deeper way. She is actually showing you more of herself. And so shouldn't she be more trustworthy? And I don't just mean that in terms of her body, right? I just mean in terms of her art, her expression, her humanity. She's being more real. Isn't that more worthy of our trust?
And I would also add to that because I mean, this is obviously a conversation that can go on.
Yeah.
I'm of the mind that there's should be some, when we have police officers and people in positions of public trust and responsibility, they should be held to higher standards in conduct, not only on the job, but also off the job, because it's not just a job. This is
Right.
a responsibility when you're in these certain types of positions. Where we
Yes.
draw that line is something that definitely has to be discussed. I think it should have something to do with does it hinder their ability to perform that
Yep.
responsibility?
Yep.
Um, and look at it from there. Um, if
Yep.
she's a good police officer, and from what we've read, it seems like she has been a very good police officer. I think in some articles said she was decorated. Um, then maybe this is not a hindrance in her duties, or it could be a hindrance going forward. We don't know. But um,
See, I agree with everything you just said. However, I view it as not something that lowers you. I look at something that elevates you. So when we say police officers and public servants are held to higher standards, I agree with that. And I believe she's actually raising her standards by participating in the arts and by embracing her human side. I don't look at it like, oh, we saw more of her body, therefore we can't trust her. Like that just sounds stupid to me.
right. Yeah, I
Immature.
mean,
It sounds very immature. You know what I mean?
yeah, I can see that angle as well, you know. So,
So, all right. Uh, yes, very
well, Melissa Mercado, if you're listening, hit us up. We'd love to have continue the discussion. Uh, see what
yeah.
happened afterwards.
Right, right. I think it was unfair, by the way they treated her, and I think we also lost out, evidently, on a good detective in the Special Victims Unit because now we're seeing that she was reassigned to a precinct in Kingsbridge no longer apparently doing that kind of work. So
Right.
really, right? Over a video, we're gonna lose one of our better detectives. Okay, all right. You can't convince me that that's a good move. So we've got work to do. I think
Yes, catch us on YouTube
can't
and
be said enough.
everywhere podcasts are available.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Good luck. Good luck.